Thanks for coming out here. I'm glad our speakers are working and we've got it all tested and ready to go. So we're actually live streaming this out over the web right now. So just for our live stream viewers at home, we are at Smith Commons in Washington, D.C., and we're doing our third ever Brew Talks. Basically, Brew Talks is sort of a concept that we started a couple months back to offer people in the beer space, some fine folks in the craft beer space, an opportunity to network and learn and come hang out with some good people like Bill Butcher and John Bryant and sit to my left here. And yeah, we're doing these, completely free just to sort of connect with folks. I will make one quick plug. I think we mentioned it in some PR that we had sent out, but anyone who's sort of in the beer space, if you drop your business card with my colleague Mike Vasallo in the back, we're going to do a giveaway at the end of the night for one free attendee to our beer conference that we put on. It's May 2nd in Boston. It's called the Brewbound session. It's a full-day conference. John was actually one of my first speakers a couple years ago, so he can hopefully attest. It's a yeah, and that was in California. So yeah, talk to Mike in the back, and at the end of this, we'll pick a winner. And if you can't make it, we'll offer you some free ad space on our website. How about that? And for our live stream viewers at home, if you have any questions for these guys, and anyone actually here in the audience, tweet your questions with the hashtag BrewTalks, and I'll actually get it up here on my phone, and I'll be able to ask these guys directly. So without further ado, I'll introduce Bill Butcher and John Bryant. Why don't you guys tell your story and tell these guys about your brand?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Glad to be here. My name is Bill Butcher, and I'm the founder of Port City Brewing Company in Alexandria. It's just about 15 minutes from here. We've been open just over 2 years. We celebrated our second anniversary February 1st, and business is going great. The local market here in D.C. and the Mid-Atlantic has been very receptive to having a local brewery to brew some great quality beer, and things are going well.
John Bryant from No-Li Brewhouse. My partner Mark Irvin wasn't able to make it tonight. He's in the midst of an expansion, and we're pretty blessed to be at the home of the Zags, Spokane, although we had a rough bounce. Coach Few will be back next year. No-Li Brewhouse is right on the banks of the Spokane River. It's right downtown Spokane. Mark, my partner, is an amazing brewer of English-style ales as well as hop-forward ales, and we've been having a lot of fun helping to kind of cultivate a beer, food, and music culture in Spokane. And we're really unique that way, that the craft culture hasn't really developed yet, but is rapidly developing.
I should make note that both John and Bill have some experience in the beverage alcohol segment. John helped build the sales organizations for Odell and Deschutes and Oscar Blues. And Bill, you were in the wine business before, right?
18 years in the Mid-Atlantic region. I represented the Mondavi family. I was their sales and distribution manager in this area.
Right. So we brought you guys here today to talk about differentiation. I think I came up with this really cheesy title of Differentiation in a Sea of SKUs. But basically the premise is that there are a lot of new craft beer brands that are emerging. I think there's 2,400 brewers in the country, probably another 1,500 or so in planning. That's a lot of different brands that are out on the shelf. And so we wanted to pick your brains a little bit and hear from you on how craft brewers can differentiate themselves from one another, from the guy sitting next to them on the shelf. All sorts of a variety of different ways, packaging, branding, messaging, ingredients, you name it. You guys are the experts. We're going to talk to you about that a little bit. I'll start with Bill, just because we were talking about your sort of stint in the wine business. We were talking last week, and you mentioned that you actually built sort of Port City from more of a wine focus when you were determining, which styles you were going to brew and how you were going to actually launch into the market. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
I did. Our portfolio basically consists of 4 flagships. We do a wit beer, which is light and crisp. We do a porter, which is our dark beer, and then we do a pale ale and an IPA. And that makes up our portfolio of core beers that we brew year-round. And if you look at a typical California winery, what they produce is maybe a Sauvignon Blanc and then a Chardonnay, a Pinot Noir, and a Cabernet. So you've got light and crisp on one end of the spectrum, and then you've got dark and full-bodied on the other end of the spectrum, and then a couple stops in between. And so we tried to do a similar type of array of styles with our portfolio of flagships to try to offer something for everyone, a variety of styles and flavor profiles that should have, that cover a broad section of the market.
And those are, you know, pretty common styles in the craft beer space. And you guys are doing 6-packs primarily, correct? 6-packs?
Draft and bottles, 6-packs, yes.
So also another common thing in the craft beer space, you see a lot, people just going right off the bat going into 6-packs and draft. Now, John, you guys took a little different approach, maybe focused on a couple key styles and went into 22s, so talk about that.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a different model. You know, part of, like we're saying, reading history or learning from those that came before us is there's some very brilliant minds in craft beer from 20, 30 years ago. Rogue Ale's Jack Joyce was really the guy who gets a lot of credit for believing in that 22-ounce package for a lot of reasons. One is you can package it incredibly fresh, it travels very well, but the 22-ounce bottle gives you a lot of ways to be very nimble and flexible to market, allows you to have a lot of beer diversity, a lot of styles. So for a small company like ourselves with a 30-barrel brew house that's really trying to pride itself in experimentation of beers, innovation, constant change, and then taking advantage of all the ingredients that we live amongst, it's a perfect set. Everything we use is within 300 miles of the brew house. The hops are Yakima Valley within a couple hours. All the malted barley is basically grown around Spokane to southern Canada, and we have a pretty amazing fresh aquifer for Spokane. So we're pretty blessed to be right in the core of what ingredients can make our beer. We can get them pretty quickly, and we have a lot of fun with that.
I am going to have you just move the mic up, so I don't think these guys are getting it over the speaker. Just a little bit closer. Yeah. So each of you guys, you know, started your brands with a very in a very specific way, with a very specific focus. It was something that was well thought out. You wanted to, do, 4 key styles, sort of go across the spectrum. You wanted to do 22s using lots of local ingredients. I guess my first question for you guys would be, how important is it to sort of know who you are before you actually go to market and know who your brand is, and how do you even arrive at knowing who you are?
Well, it is important to have a plan and to know who you are and what kind of identity your brand is going to have. What we wanted to do, and it's important to know about this market, the DC market that we were moving into. Before we opened our brewery, the Metro DC was the only big city in the country that didn't have a local microbrewery. So we're moving into a market space that is severely underserved. There's a lot of pent-up demand for local beer in this area, and DC is a very robust economy. It's the 4th largest economy in the U.S., and there was nobody brewing beer inside the Beltway to serve the local market. So what we wanted to do was focus on 4 key styles, to do just a few SKUs to begin with and execute those few items extremely well. And so that's really what we focused on in building our brand identity out in the market.
So you really let the marketplace sort of drive where your brand went, at least initially.
What we did was we started with those 4 styles, and then a couple, like people ask, what is your flagship? Well, we didn't have a particular style that was going to be our flagship. We wanted the market to decide that, and what has emerged over the past couple of years is that our wit beer and our porter are very distinctive in the market, and they stand out, and they do very well for us.
You let the, I guess, the sort of the geography of the Pacific Northwest sort of define your brand as well, but it was a little bit different, more in ingredients. So how did you arrive at who No-Li was?
Yeah, I think the ingredients are really key because it allows us to step back. We can be just in time. I mean, we don't have to ship them in from somewhere else. But I think a lot of the branding really originated with Mark Irvin, our brewmaster, my partner, had been professionally brewing for nearly 25 years. He's got a great story. We'll get him out here sometime for his story. But you know, he'd been really practicing his art, and as he says, it's science and art. And like Bill, when you've just more days on the planet, guys like, you know, Jim Cook or Fritz Maytag or, you know, King Grossman, guys who are real pioneers in the industry, just have proven that out. Mark's one of those kind of guys that has just been at it like Bill for so long that he begins to take just intuitive steps. And when we got together with my background and Mark's, we sat back and said, okay, this isn't about money. This isn't about just making beer. It's like, let's do something special, a lot like Bill. We would like to make a positive contribution to the category. We'd like to make Spokane proud, but yet, you know what? We believe in these beers. We believe they can travel internationally. And before the BAA was the BAA, it was the Association of Brewers. And back then, they had Charlie Papazian, Bob Pease, and some folks that really had a vision to say, I bet you craft beer could travel overseas. The quality of beer, the diversity of beer, the uniqueness of the beer is going to stand apart. And that's when it started, say, 15 or so years ago. Mark and I stepped back and said, okay, we don't want to compete in the six-pack and half-pack arena. Necessarily in the West Coast, it's much more chain-driven. What we'd like to do is get a lot of diversity with fresh ingredients and display the Northwest around the world. It takes baby steps because you have to prove a lot of things out along the way. It needs to be profitable, beer needs to be fresh, you need to be confident in how it travels. Business partnerships and those things take time. But what we're finding over time is you can find great business partners that have been doing it a long time like Bill, that just have proven track records that come through for you.
Well, when you guys launched, would you say that you filled a niche? I mean, it definitely seems like for Port City, you filled the niche of like being the local microbrewery. And I don't know, John, what was it? I mean, was there a niche that No-Li was filling at the time when you rebranded and, you know, maybe tell the story of Northern Lights and how you rebranded to No-Li.
Essentially, Mark and I got together, you know, over a year ago, putting this business model. Northern Lights Brewing Company is what we desired to keep. There's a brewery on the East Coast that started using these names about, say, 4 years ago, and, you know, through efforts to try to find a reasonable solution, at some point you just kind of step away and go, let's take the high road. And we want to preserve the culture that had been built for 19 years in Northern Lights Brewing Company. But we also have to look at the financial part of it and say, do we want to pay lawyers? Do you want the emotional baggage of it? Bill and I, probably through the industry, have been on all those roads and all those rabbit holes.
Having a plan B.
Yeah.
And not just having a plan B, but loving your plan B.
Yeah. And humble enough to say, maybe we should just be the ones to take plan B and use all that time, energy, and money to go build something better. So Northern Lights became No-Li, short, obviously No-Li, Northern Lights. And what it gave us the permission to do, though, was to kind of look at all the great things that Mark had built in 19 years of Northern Lights and 25 years of brewing, and my experience at Rainier and Henry's, you know, Deschutes Brewery and Odell and Oscar Blues, and try to put it all together and say, okay, let's take something out there that finds a niche, that we can have fun doing, and serves the customer really well. And then you take all those local ingredients, you know, and pretty soon you have, you know, Born and Raised IPA, which is named after basically every hometown in America, but specifically Spokane, where a lot of us are born somewhere, you know, we're raised there, and we move away because we want to experience whatever that's not at your hometown, no matter how great your hometown is. And eventually a lot of those people move back, and you have a family or you settle down. And that's kind of celebration of that brand, and I think what No-Li is, it's a little Americana, but it's that spirit of independence in all of us that says you don't have to follow a cookie-cutter method that somebody did before you.
John, what niche were you filling when you entered?
In Spokane?
Yeah.
I would say it was more of a Pacific Northwest niche. Spokane is an amazing city. You know, in 1974, it was the smallest city in the world to host a World's Fair. World's Fair for about 150 years were a pretty big deal. It's where technology was released and exposed to the world. You know, as time kind of went on and there were other things to fill its void, it kind of faded. But 1974 saw a community of about 250,000 people come together to host this fair. Part of what Mark and I want to do is keep some of that pride going and showcase that Spokane necessarily isn't second fiddle to any other city in the United States. That Spokane, Washington could have a beer culture of somewhere on the East Coast, of Bend, Oregon, of Fort Collins. You know, pick a city that you love craft beer from. We can develop that there. And so part of the niche was, it was emotional. It was bringing pride to our city, but also having the confidence in Mark to know this guy can brew some really amazing beers. And you give a great brewer great ingredients that are fresh and allow them just to go crazy, and that's what happens. Bill knows that. He does it every day.
John, what you're talking about a lot is in the wine business, it's known as terroir. It's something that is indigenous to a brand. It's something that's unique, and it can't be replicated anywhere else. And that's what you guys are building in Spokane, a real identity that not only is made up of the ingredients, like terroir in wine, but it's made up of the culture that your brand is built around, and it's made up by the people. And all those things go into the terroir of a beer brand. And we're doing a similar thing. The ingredients that we use, while we don't have barley growing in the Mid-Atlantic and we don't have hops growing in the Mid-Atlantic, we've been able to find a Virginia grower of wheat that we're able to make our optimal wit beer with, which we've been delighted with the quality of his grain. But all those things go into the terroir of a beer brand in a similar way that wine has terroir.
And niches and you know, sort of finding your niche and having that terroir and having that little element of a story to tell the consumer. If you're, I know John, you guys do a lot of canvassing in the package stores and in the supermarkets, you know, really connecting with consumers. But how far can that carry? I mean, can the wheat story of, you know, where you're getting your grains from carry your brand, you know, beyond your local market?
Good question, and our distribution model is one of, I call it concentric circles. And we opened up 2 years ago just selling in Metro DC, and DC, the district proper in Northern Virginia and suburban Maryland. So kind of around the Beltway that's our home market. So that's our first concentric circle. And then as we get established in that market, we've been able to move out to the next outer ring, the next concentric circle. And now we're at a point where our beer is sold in Maryland, DC, Virginia, North Carolina. But yeah, you raise a good point in that local story and the fact that we're using Virginia wheat and Maryland honey and Chesapeake Bay oysters in our oyster stout. That message fades as you get farther and farther from home. And that's where the beer has to be sold more on its quality than the fact that you're the hometown guy making good beer. So yeah, as you get farther from home, it definitely doesn't speak as loudly.
Do you see any of that with the No-Li brand?
Well, I mean, like when you and I and Bill were talking earlier, there's 2,400 approximate craft brewers in the United States. I think you'd said there's 1,500 licenses or some amazing number coming online. And we talked about it, it's like niches and neighborhoods. How are we going to exist? When you have that many breweries coming online, and you have this much capacity being added in the U.S. industry. You pick up any, say a media publication each day, and it talks about a new brewer either being built on the East Coast or the West Coast, and not only is that capacity coming online very quickly in a beer industry that's growing at 15%, well, the capacity, is it coming on at 40%? And what's that do potentially if you're a small guy as we're developing, get in that undertow of pricing? If you look at the history of beer in the United States, Anheuser-Busch was brilliant at driving out larger competitors in the market on pricing. That if we go to a package size, it puts us very vulnerable to a larger brewer that can control pricing. Bill's beers are amazing, they're packaged phenomenally, he'll withstand that. But if you have a beer that maybe doesn't stand apart and a beer style that stands apart, your pricing may not hold. And when you're small, those margins in dollars, I'll keep you in business. And so we talk about niches and neighborhoods. Can you carve out a place for the next few years where you can develop a market, like with Chesapeake Oysters, and do this beer that nobody can do like he does, right? Or can you do something that we can do in Spokane because our ingredients are so fresh? I don't know, not everybody can. And that's going to be a distinct part of it is what makes you special and very relevant with your customer. One last thing is, a lot of our foundation, was built around Spokane and the World's Fair of 1974. And what we're trying to do is create a message that's relevant to every city in the United States. Crystal Bitter is basically made after a turn-of-the-century laundry that had to be torn down on Canada Island so they could build the pavilion for the World's Fair. And so how many bottles do you have that have washing machines on them? Okay. It's an inside joke or an inside story, but if you pick up the bottle and you read about it, maybe you bond with it a little bit and go, well, that's pretty special. And I know Bill and the beers they do the same thing.
It speaks to authenticity, and that's one thing that is very important to any small brewery. And your customers want that authenticity. They want. We're finding that people want to come look at our tanks. They want to come to our tasting room. They want to be a part of the brewery itself. They want to meet the brewers. They bump into us at bars around town, and we have and that's part of the authenticity that's so important that that has to be there for a new brand.
Yeah, I think. Maybe perhaps an interchangeable word for authenticity might be sort of relevancy. And I brought up this point when we were chatting last week that it's in some ways really easy to differentiate yourself. You can come out and be the barrel-aged brewery, or you can be the sour brewery, or you can be the IPA brewery. And you might be able to get a little bit of buzz online and get people following you. But having something that's relevant for the consumers is a whole nother story. And so I guess my question would be, how can craft brewers make themselves relevant, and how have you guys made your brands relevant?
What? Good.
No, I was just going to say, I touched on it earlier. It's about when we opened our brewery, it was about doing a few things extremely well and brewing beers that craft beer drinkers understand, and brewing beers in with extremely high quality and with consistent quality and consistent availability. That's one of the ways that we've been able to differentiate ourselves, but it's styles of beers that our customers can relate to. We do have the one-off beers where the brewers get creative, like a smoked porter, or we talked about the oyster stout, but those aren't the core of our brand. Those are things that are fun, but the categories that we're in are relevant to our customers. They're approachable styles, they're easy for people to drink, and they're easy for people to understand.
But how about as you move further away, as you start opening some new markets? I mean, if Port City all of a sudden is in Boston in a couple years where we're at, what's going to make me want to pick up, Optimal Wit over, say, like Allagash White, which has a really big presence in that category that's also relevant for a lot of, folks in the Northeast?
It's a number of things. It's recognition. It's trying to get out and be in beer competitions and getting your name out there as a quality producer and as a consistent quality producer. That's some of the things that we've focused on since we've opened.
Speaking of getting a little further away from home, you guys have your beer here in D.C., John. That's quite a bit of ways away from No-Li. So I guess what are you seeing here in D.C. that speaks to sort of that relevancy topic? Why are consumers here that maybe not are from Spokane or maybe don't connect directly with Spokane? Why are they picking up your beer?
This gets me pretty excited. What we're trying to do goes against the grain a little bit. It goes against the grain a little bit, but there's also a lot of people who have taught us before that this can work. And I'll keep using Jack Joyce, a rogue. Man's brilliant. He pioneered the 22, and he pioneered craft beer internationally. And he showed what you can do with great brewers, with great ingredients, making innovative beers. They will carry with the right packaging. For us, Visit Spokane is our local tourism board, and they draw tourism in the greater area to Spokane. They also have an office in Washington, D.C. So we're able to team up with Visit Spokane here and Visit Spokane in Washington, D.C. to build not only Spokane as a national name, but maybe some innovative stuff that we're doing in No-Li tied together. As part of the Brewers Association of America's Export Development Program with Paul Gatza and Bob Pease and Mark Schneider, we entered some beers in some international contests. And we wanted to see, A, how the beer would hold up. If the beers were as good as we thought they were, with a huge bias. And within 4 or 5 months, we were pretty fortunate or blessed to have won a number of medals for the beers overseas. And it's the same thing that Bill would do, or a lot of other breweries do if they had that opportunity or knew the access to that channel. I mean, it makes No-Li special, but at the same point, there's room out there for a lot more craft breweries to take advantage of that market. So we're just seeing Spokane is a great market that we're going to gradually work with the local community and build more craft brewers. And by the way, in the last year, 12 new craft breweries have opened in Spokane. Wow. So it is now experiencing the same kind of what we call the gold rush with our distributors. There might have been 3 or 4, 5 small craft breweries in Spokane a year ago. Today there's 18. So it might be a little bit behind, but it is rapidly progressing. And with that, we believe that we can build an international brand if we take the right steps, do the right things, and bring some pride back to our city.
As a side note, I was in a bar last week that had your beer on tap on 18th Street downtown, and you talk about how do you get the word out, but the bartender was speaking very highly of it, and that's where I first had your beer last week. So good stuff.
So you actually mentioned you hit the nail on the head with my next question. There was 3 or 4 breweries you said in Spokane, and now there's 18. There's a lot of breweries coming online. Are we starting to maybe reach somewhat of a point of oversaturation a little bit?
I would say no, and the reason I'll say that is because if you look at the wine business, there's over 7,000 wineries in the U.S., and you don't hear anybody talking about a wine bubble, or you don't hear anybody talking about, well, we have too many wineries. Can all these wineries survive? You know, some will, some won't. But then I don't know that the raw number, is really that important. You know, what we're talking about tonight is differentiation, authenticity, quality of the product, consistency of the product, distribution, and those are the kind of things that go into building a brand, a successful brand, really aside from the number of competitors that are in a market space.
I have a retort to you. Yes. There are a lot of wine brands, 7,000 like you said, but a lot of them are sort of noise in a way. As a consumer that might walk into a grocery store and see all the array of wine brands on the shelf, who's to say that they can remember more than a few of them when they come back? And if you sort of look at that from a beer perspective, and it gets back to this point of differentiation. How are you guys going to create a consumer if what sort of seems like the beer space is becoming noise, much like you pointed to the baseline number of 7,000 isn't, they don't fade away, but a lot of them are just sort of noise in a way. Do you think that there's too much noise maybe coming online here?
There is noise in the marketplace. There's always noise in the marketplace, but there's basic brand building that have to do with the points that we've talked about, the authenticity, the ingredients, the quality, and those things are what carry a craft beer brand. Are you going to get everybody? No. Is a wine brand going to get everybody? No. Most people don't care that much about the brand of wine that they're drinking. I believe that craft beer is different. It's built through hand selling, not necessarily on a grocery shelf, but in a bottle shop, in a bar where the bartender's recommending a certain type of beer. But those type of third-party endorsements really help to build a solid brand. Do
you think that craft beer sort of trending, much like the wine space is with all those brands, is a positive or a negative for the craft beer industry?
Well, I want to go back, and I totally agree with Bill, is that there aren't too many brands, there aren't too many beers, because there's a tidal wave and that it's just starting to go. And if you look at it, growing up in the Northwest, which was a mining, timber, agricultural community, there's a reason there was a lot of beer and there was a lot of coffee, because it looked like this outside where it's raining and cold, right? And those taverns were a great place where you would have 4 Rainier handles and a couple Heidelbergs and a Black Label, and that's what it was. And then as variety and diversity came in, now you go to that same tavern, which is now a gastropub or some type of pub, and they have 22 handles. They've worked on their kitchen. They've brought in a chef, and all of a sudden now they're known for amazing food, great lunches, and some of the freshest craft beer, in the country. And a pioneer like Sam Calagione at Dogfish Head, because his glass is right there. And what Adam Lambert's doing, going across the country as their evangelist, to your point, hand selling. And that's what we were so proud of. I mean, we did 25,000, and you do it every day. We kind of kept count of them because we were investing a lot into it. Grocery hand sales in a period of about 5 months, where we literally talked to that many people personally. And it's to Bill's point, is we were trying to tell the story that's on those bottles, the story that's authentic or relevant. And when you get so big at a certain size, it's like that coffee shop down the street that used to be really cool to hang out in. It's very comfortable, and now there's 80 of them in a chain. Some people just naturally go for the underdog, and they go for that person who buys the beans at a little higher cost that were fresh roasted, and they know they're paying more for a cup of coffee because it costs that small entrepreneur more to make that cup of coffee, but there's a bond that happens in that coffee shop. When I was coming from the airport to here in a cab, I just started laughing, and the cab driver, what are you laughing about? And it was the back of a DC local car that said, eat local, eat fresh. And I'm thinking in DC, how many gardens are there? But there must be some. But that was the last thing I thought I would see in Washington, DC is an eat local, eat fresh bumper sticker. So there's obviously pride even here in that.